Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the latest Arcade Attack podcast. I've got a really special guest with us today. We've got Michael Latham here. How you doing, Michael?
Doing excellent. Yourself?
I'm not too bad at all. No, honestly, it really is an honour. And in case people don't know, you've had a huge role working at one of our favourite companies, SEGA, and you've got some amazing stories to tell, I'm sure. You've been a producer, executive producer. I think I've got a group director here of the Omega Group, SEGA Soft. I mean, you were one of the real heartbeats of that company during probably its most important time of its career. So I'm so looking forward to hearing what it was like working at such an iconic company.
Sure, excellent. I was there for sum total through all the variations, about 9 years, almost made it a decade.
That's incredible. Before we talk about SEGA, though, because I know that'll be the bulk of our interview, I'm sure, but how did you first get the opportunity to enter the video game industry, and what was the first ever game you worked on?
Okay, so I was going to joke that, one of my first preschool toys was a little computer with the two wheels that like you see in the 70s. I was predestined to be a computer person, but I grew up, just so you know, I was, at high school age in the 80s, what you would refer to as the war games generation. We came up through an interesting cycle. Technology was started really slow and went really fast. So I can kind of talk about four important things very quickly. Owning in television. That was very impactful. That was not really probably seen in the UK, but was a really important thing here because it allowed third-party titles outside of the control of what would be, the normal Atari flow. I grew up in the coin-op era, so I went to the arcade, just like in the old movies. You'd see all the kids in the arcades. I was dead center of that. I used to go and win tokens because I would master games like Star Castle and Bump and Jump and stuff like that. The other thing two other things. Then I walk into a store. It's a computer store. And in those days, they were mom and pops. There was no centralized. And they were selling a PC Junior. Not a great machine, but running on it was King's Quest. And that just blew my mind. I had not seen smooth animation, and the fact that it was like, in a sense, an open world, it just blew my mind. And funny enough, I would almost work for Sierra. I had a job offer from them, but I couldn't move at that time. And then the last thing was, I was in the era of the retail software store. I don't know, trying to remember when my time in the UK, but here there was a specific time and place where, like, bookstores developed their own brand of computer software and book areas. So I worked for Software Etc., a place called Egghead Software. And so that really allowed me to have access to all these titles. We could open them, we could play them, I could take books out. And that was really important because at the time, for various reasons, I wasn't able to go to college. So I was having to sort of self-teach, self-educate myself, and I had access to, hundreds and thousands of these books, all about all these programming languages and stuff. So all that builds into me using, believe it or not, that retail store to make a key contact. In those days, they had to send representatives to the store to essentially get you to, be part of an evangelist for their product. So this person walks in, and most of the people that would come in were business software, very boring stuff. But once in a while, we get some game people in there. And the person that walked in was going to be the head of the U.S. version of Rainbird Software. And Rainbird Software, of course, British Telecom owned at the time. Had two other brands, Firebird, Silverbird. huge Spectrum, in the old days, even had, when I got there, had cassette games. So I joined them on the U.S. team, and that was my first job. So I was on the U.S. side, and my job was essentially, at first, was just to create demo discs, for the products so that we could hand them out. And by the way, our offices were right in the subsection of the Activision offices. So I start there, and I move up. I get kind of promoted, and I start to work with the development team on the UK side. So I spend a lot of time in central London, and I get to work on stuff like Star Glider 2, Carrier Command, Weird Dreams, Stunt Car Racer. I get to do stuff like Universal Military Simulator in the US, and it's all going swimmingly, except for British Telecom then decides there's no future in gaming using the their connective, to connect via phones initially, and then the internet. And nice. So they shut it down, and I'm sort of stunned because at the time I'm thinking, well, British Telecom, this is, we got the largest company behind us of any software. This is not going anywhere. So that then leads me over to Activision.
Did you enjoy living? Were you living in the UK for a bit then? Is that right?
Yeah, for a bit. Yeah, for a bit. They put me up the first stretch for 30, 60 days at a time. Sometimes even a bit longer. As much as the visa would hold. I loved it. I love London. In fact, when I took time off, I'll explain that a little later, but I took time to travel, and so I spent an enormous amount of time popping in and out of London.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, we're mainly based in Croydon. I don't know if you've ever been to Croydon, Michael. It's just outside of, it's out of London, really. I do want to move on to Activision, but you just mentioned a game. I know you mentioned a lot of big games there, but Weird Dreams. We've done a podcast on that game, and I'm a massive fan. I know it's quite unusual. It's a bit of a cult title. Do you have much?
It is. It is a total cult title. No, we didn't. We definitely got to work with them. I did not get to participate. That one was, they had a clear vision of what they were doing, and we're quite, happy to be left alone. And so we did. We let them, because that was such an unusual one. And there was also, I don't know if you remember, there was Corruption and Fish as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Good times. But how did it?
That was the U.S. market for that one. Boy, that was a hard sell. Let me tell you.
I suppose it's a very British sort of. Yeah.
Exactly. It was, and I did try and work with them on if we could Americanize the product, quote unquote. And it just didn't make sense when we thought about it, because it was almost going to have to be it was a very specific sensibility.
Yeah, it had kind of like Monty Python kind of look and feel, didn't it? So you're right, it had to kind of keep that British look. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Weird Dreams, by the way. I think it's not perfect, a bit clunky with the controls, but it's something quite interesting about it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, no, I like you said, it has a cult following, and when I mention it to people once in a while, I'll definitely find a rare U.S. person who got it and loved it, and yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, let's talk about Activision then. How did that opportunity come about? That wasn't UK, was it? Was that back in the US? I take it.
That's back in the US. So I'm in the offices there, and we're not really allowed or supposed to be able to. So we have a sealed door, and we're behind the break room. So they said, okay, you can use the break room, but and we had to use their bathrooms. We didn't have a bathroom facility, but we weren't supposed to go wandering around. And what happened is with time, I would pop out, and there was a power drift machine there, which later I would find out why there was a power drift machine there. I just thought it was, a cool company, and they got to have cool stuff. So I would sneak out when no one was around and play the power drift machine, and people would amble in and, wonder who those weird people were behind the door. And so I got to know everybody eventually, and eventually they said, you're okay. You can kind of amble around, and we don't mind if you want to hang out, especially I would work real late. And some of the team there would be working late. And so they'd be like, yeah, come on over. And, so I got to know everybody. And when British Telecom essentially said goodbye and just left us, holding boxes of our stuff, Sherry Whiteley, who was the head of product development, said, we've been observing you and had a lot of interest, but we felt uncomfortable, poaching you because the renting space, it just didn't seem right. They said, would you be interested in coming over, be a associate producer, and we view your specialty as kind of firefighting, because at that time I could code, so I was unique among some of the producers there. Most of them were not from a technical background. Most of them didn't know how to make music assets or art assets or how to do any of that stuff. So that's exactly what I did. I came over and they put me on a bunch of projects that were on fire. I had stuff like a wrestling game called Takedown, which is not very memorable, but I shipped it, got it out. It was just one of these projects that no one could get to finish, get it bug free. I was on a product called F-14 Tomcat, which was a Dynamics product. Again, was kind of problematic. One of the things I developed for Takedown was I started to work on a Omni Music driver with one of this really smart programmers there, and we developed digital speech that could even work on a PC with just a normal PC speaker. So that's a 1-bit digital audio. And then let's see, I eventually then went on to work on Power Drift. It was one of those projects, again, on fire. But the interesting thing about Power Drift was I flew to Diamond Bar, California, and I find out the people are in a house. They're not in an office, and door opens, and there's Rod Nakamoto, who's going to be the future guy I work with to do Eternal Champions. And he has 2 guys working in there, and those are 2 of the programmers, and his wife, who's doing the art for Power Drift. And I get Power Drift with, we get it shipped, and we love working with each other because they love that I'm technical, and I could come up with ideas and workarounds, and also we just liked each other. It just was a matter of chemistry. And so we got that shipped out, and that kind of created how I got on Sega's radar as well.
Yeah, because you worked on the ports of Power Drift, is that right?
Yes,
Michael?
I worked on the PC Commodore version. I'm trying to think if there was another. So I worked on the ports, so they had to be aware and had to kind of give their blessing. And so the 2 things I would say of note at Activision that are kind of the important part is that I do, David Crane was a big hero. And so I know you guys definitely talked to him, did an interview.
He's an amazing. Well, he's a legend, isn't he? Let's be honest.
Yeah, and I've met a lot of people in the business. I've not met him, so I sort of viewed that. I really respected what he did, and so the funny part is kind of history repeats with me, which is Activision is kind of struggling financially, and they need a big kind of financial hit at the time. And it turned out that they had the Ghostbusters 2 license. And So Sherry Whiteley comes in and tells me, well, we're going to need your help on Ghostbusters 2. Here's the problem. I guess they had the designer and the producer kept putting off, saying it was coming along, and the game was just a disaster, and we had 3 months left to ship it. So I pretty much was employed, moved in to the developer for quite a while, worked with Dynamics around the clock, literally like just crazy 18-hour days, and did the design in one day with my friend Tony Van, who I would work with all throughout this process, and we shipped it, and we saved the company. It was from the U.S. side, it was definitely a financial success, but the company was at this point kind of starting to have some serious problems because the leadership renamed it Mediagenic. We had a looming lawsuit that would pretty much take us out, the famous Magnavox lawsuit that took a lot of people out. So the other thing I did there, which is the important one of note, is I did a game, worst title ever, worst box cover ever, but it's called Tongue of the Fat Man.
I haven't heard of it, no.
No, it's unfortunately Razorsoft did a horrible version. If you've ever seen this Razorsoft fighting game where there's like these little blue guys and kind of like what looks like a cement background. Anyway, I think it's Mondo's Fight Palace on what Razorsoft. Anyway, what Razorsoft got was an alpha that I had created that they bought when the company went bankrupt. But the important thing about Tongue of the Fat Man is that I'm in, let's see, that puts me in 1990, I think, is Tongue of the Fat Man, or maybe even 89. I think it's 89. So in 89, I create a fighting game. The only fighting game that's in the arcades is Street Fighter 1 with the giant buns.
Yeah. Which is not a brilliant game, ironically, is it? Even though it's amazing, the second one's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So when later I get people saying, well, Eternal Champions was just a complete ripoff of, Mortal and Street Fighter, was not. It was that I create this Tongue of the Fat Man. It was originally supposed to be called Red Belt. If anybody listening to this wants to Google the cover, it's the artist who's quite a portly, large man with his head upside down, marbles in his nose, so that it looks, the marbles are the eyeballs of the cover.
Wow.
Yeah,
people are going to be Googling it now, Michael, furiously.
Yeah, no, it is constantly referenced as one of the all-time worst titles, worst box covers ever. But the game itself, I was real proud of it because it had all these alien fighters, it had a betting system, it had an enhancement system, it had a weapon system, and this is all on low-powered 386 PCs. Amazing, yeah. So I was pretty ahead of the curve, but because of the company being in the financial condition, no one really knew about it. But I was working on at Activision, we got two Genesis titles granted to us, 2 slots. One was the ill-fated Joe Montana project, which has a long and sordid history that everybody knows about. And the other was Tongue of the Fat Man, or I think we were going to call it just Fight Palace, or Mondo's Fight Palace. So I was working on that. So the team there at SEGA of America was aware that, one project was going badly, one project was going well, the one that I was managing. So yeah, that's, essentially where it ends. I mean, I remember that we went bankrupt, and Bobby Kotick, did a hostile takeover of the company, and they walked in and said, "Okay, we're moving all this to LA, and you guys pack your boxes, and away you go."
I mean, you in that short space of time, you've been sort of, yeah, I don't want to sound rude, Michael, but you haven't had too much luck with British Telecom and Activision all going, basically on fire. It
Well,
must have been, yeah.
it was transitional because what you have to understand is the big difference between when I walk into Sega and when I walk into Activision. So I walk into Activision, the company's really based on doing softwares for PCs, Commodores, dabbling in business software, but then they're trying to make this pivot to the Super Nintendo, which, by the way, at this point, I'm running the music group, and I'm also running the tools and technology group inside, and as well as running the products. And so I'm actually going to Japan because we had what they call a Sony News workstation, and that's what SNES development. This was a monster, just development thing that was built, and it would never work, and I finally got it to work. And so I remember the first time I saw the Super Nintendo graphics fire up in Mode 7, all that, and this was way ahead before they had even demonstrated it, and so we were trying to pivot, and there were a lot of people who were trying to pivot, and very few were successful that were of that mix. So once I got to Sega, of course the whole thing is focused, and from that point the two markets, the sort of PC gamer market then goes on to develop, really because of Doom, and the multiplayer market, in which later I'll sort of revisit in my Sega career, and then of course we go to the Sega market. Thankfully, I get to stick around now for 9 years, but this is always what happens in the video game industry, and you can see the cycles that sort of happen each and every time.
And obviously you picked up skills, you developed your career there. Just getting the chance to work on a fighting game, I've just googled the picture for Tongue of the Fat Man. It's a combat. It's ridiculous.
It is.
It's almost, I don't even know what to say about it. It's worse
stunning.
than Weird Dreams. If that was in Weird Dreams, people don't know that's too weird.
No, I mean, and it bummed me out because underneath it, when you have time, take a look at some screenshots, take a look at what I was doing there so early. Like I said, I had this whole system of bio enhancements and weapons, and I even had a primitive combo system in there, all that stuff.
Amazing. I mean, and just really quick on Power Drift, because obviously that ties in quite nicely to Sega as well. I mean, that was a classy game. The 3D, it's not really 3D, is it? The way they've done it, but it's amazing. Are you a fan of the game? Full stop. I'm sure you are.
Full stop. I mean, I was on that machine. I cannot tell you how much time I spent on that machine. I just loved it. I adored it.
Love it. And how about, really quick before we go to Sega, I've got to ask you about Ghostbusters 2. Did you get to see the film before? Did you get a chance to meet anyone on the film set, or is it literally, here's the script, get on with it, kind of thing?
Yeah, so here's the fun part. So I did not get to see the film before because the project was already late to what it should have been. So it came after. So I'd seen the film, but they sent me special assets so that I could digitally do the voices. I talked about that Omni Music driver. We had improved that, and by then early sound cards were coming, like Ad-Libs. I don't think the Sound Blaster had occurred, but PCs were starting to get sound cards, and so I digitized their voices, and I worked with our music group, which I was again running, to do all the music with them so that we could use as much music from the from the movie. So I did get to talk to the cast
That's
because
great.
I needed to get their sign off, and that was tough because I had to kind of, I'm trying to explain to them that, and thank God I didn't have to demonstrate it on a 1-bit speaker. If they had heard it on that, what that sounded like, I probably would have never got them to allow me to do it. But because I had a really high end at the time AdLib Gold card, I think, I sort of got them to understand what was the limits of the technology, and they let me keep it in. And I'm very proud. I mean, I won't say it's like, oh wow, it's my favorite game design I've ever done. I mean, we did it in one night, and I executed in 3 months, really.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, different times. I mean, I think that sum total of my team at Dynamics that I had access to was like 6 guys, if that. It was much smaller days, much smaller games. But I am very proud that the visuals, the way that the visuals look, the way that the characters actually speak, from the movie with the real voices. So, it was an early, one of the earliest things where you had a movie tie-in and you had actual audio from, the stars.
That's great. I mean,
so I was all proud of that. Yeah.
Definitely. Where do you rate it as a film compared to the first one?
Yeah, it's funny. I think the first one stands alone. It really did not need the second one. I think the fact that we lost Harold Ramis, I'm happy the second one exists because it's more Harold Ramis. And there's parts of it that I like. I mean, I think we've seen as they've tried to put together the third one time and again that without Harold Ramis to sort of tether Aykroyd down, Aykroyd tends to have this other feel to the comedy. And that's how I feel about Ghostbusters too. It feels much more Aykroyd driven than Ramis, the first one being Ramis driven.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, definitely. Well, Michael, you kind of hinted, but how exactly did you get the opportunity to join Sega? I mean, Activision's huge. Let's not say it isn't, but Sega, man, that must have been amazing.
Well, at the time, not really when you think about it, because Sega is in South San Francisco next to Salami Company, in a business park, in a really tiny building, just crammed full of people. Sonic is not even there yet. Sonic shows up soon. I had worked with Scott Beerfield, and he was over there, and from Activision, who I would later he would leave, and I would take over the EC project. But what happened is that I knew that there was a bunch of good guys there, and so I just sort of called them and said, hey, I'm that guy that was here, and sort of here's my skill set, and I'm kind of known for being a firefighter type of guy, and I can write original designs, and I've written this fighting game, and I worked on the Ghostbusters, so I know how to deal with licensing people. So it really kind of fit. And Clyde Grossman was the guy that interviewed me, and he had this dinky little office. I think it was like literally a broom closet. The lawyer was out in the garage where they kept the inventory. I mean, this is how crazy small it was. And pretty much the day or week I joined, Tom Kalinske joined.
Amazing.
So I was there, and I think Katz had left, but Kalinske had not arrived by like a week or two. I was there because then I remember Kalinske appearing in his office. And again, the place was so small, and I was such a night person. I would always stay in, till crazy hours. So I couldn't help but run into Tom in those early days. And so us both being new, there'd be a certain amount of friendly interaction about just being new to the company. I think my original thing was I sat in like a little cubby open area. There was just, no offices. And I think the senior guys, I think Ed had an office and Bearfield had an office. And the rest of us were sort of all sitting out in the central area. Sega was so tiny that, it was, the Genesis was launched, but I think it was just that initial bump of titles like the Tommy Lasorda, that sort of stuff. And it was Aaron Senna, a lot of sports games, and some Japanese ports, and the guys were all working on their various projects. I think Bearfield's working on Toe Jam and Earl at that point, and I don't know if Ed's yet doing Echo. I don't think so. I don't think he's quite started Echo yet. Yeah. But the guys are all working on just the beginning of what would be the Sega America launch as most people understood it.
It must have been amazing. Seeing that company so small, and it obviously grew very quickly over the next few years. So you were originally brought in as a producer, is that right? Or
yes,
was Omega involved in that? I mean, I'm a little bit confused by the different sort of roles you've had.
Yeah. So Omega comes a bit later. So what happens is I walk in about April 1991 is when I'm starting, and I'm working with Japan to sort of get the launch titles. That's what you do normally, at least at Sega. When you first came in, you had to pay the piper by doing ports with Japan, or other, maybe we bought a title from someone else. I'm helping launch the Game Gear for the U.S. market. I'm working at that point. I sort of get, I'm part of the Genesis launch team as a producer. And then I'm also working. Let's see. Oh, and what I'm kind of stuck doing is not only am I, kind of having to do the ports. I'm not getting to do anything original yet. I get pulled in by Shinobu Toyota, who is working with our licensing group, and it turns out that they bought, like, if you can imagine, just someone putting a box down on your desk of all these bizarre bad licenses that they had acquired. And you're like staring into this thing and you're like, what, a Paula Abdul game? No, I don't want to make a Paula Abdul game.
Wow.
And,
is that a joke? Was that actually real?
No, that's real. No, I had to go to a Paula Abdul concert with Shinobu, who loved her to bits.
Wow.
An MC Hammer game. I could just go on. And so I out of that, I see this board game, and I figure out, okay, I got to get an original title, something I can make. So what I do is I grab this board game, and it's called Green Dog, and it's a board game. And so Shinobu says, well, we're going to make a board game, on a video board game. And I'm like, no, over my dead body, we're going to make a video board game. So I then pitched, we'll make a side scroller using the character. I get Rick Green, who's unfortunately passed away, really sadly, the creator of the Green Dog board game. Explained to him, look, you got a great character. I'll trust me, I'll handle it. And I work with the Eternal Champion guys on what is our first original game. Now we get ridiculous, basically no money to make this thing. We get no time. It's another one of those. I think we had 5 or 6 months total to make that. But we make it, and we prove to the company, that I brought in this really good developer, Interactive Designs, that they're going to be very valuable. In fact, so much that we end up purchasing them and turning them into Sega LA. And I proved to the company that I can create an original game. And so at that point, then I'm sort of moving up to the next step, and that's when Scott Beerfield's going to leave. And Scott Beerfield is he's got a 10-page treatment for a thing called Eternal Champions, and Clyde had just divided the groups up between and named them, called one named Alpha, which is Ed's group, and one named Omega, which is Scott Beerfield's group. So when Scott left, Clyde said, I think you're the obvious person to take over Omega. And so I did.
So wow, that's amazing. Eternal Champ. Yes,
and I should tell you, at that time, the teams are sort of jumbled because we got, I think the sports team is part of Omega at this time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it lasts for just a little bit because once everything they got us split into these two teams, we started to realize, sports should be on its own, have its own leadership, and we would go from there on, dividing teams out as it made sense. It just so happened that I continued to build out Omega. Ed had less interest in building his group out, kept a very small group. He would always joke that he'd want to rename it Amoeba. So that's how Omega gets created, is that I take over what is essentially, it had just been formed. I don't even think they had a meeting.
So you literally, you literally took it over completely. It wasn't like games before. Wow, that's a big role, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was a very big role. And then on top of it, I get told, Scott was doing this thing, and it's a fighting game, and of course my eyes light up.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh yeah, that explains the Street Fighter 2 machine in the break room.
Oh really?
So yeah, there's a Turbo Street Fighter 2 machine, and I'm in there killing everybody with Chun-Li, just slaughtering everybody. And I think Clyde actually hears that I'm slaughtering everybody, because he's not aware that I have this fighting game background until. So I think I actually got the project because I was just good at killing everybody with Chun-Li. But then I inform him about I have this project, and he says to me, Clyde is awesome guy. And he says very drolly, you have to do what Scott plans. You can't change the plan. I'm like, it's a 10-page concept that, and Scott's concept was he was going to do a Simon Bisley, this artist, and it was all going to be about like real gross dwarfs with like flies around them, and they have all kinds of medieval weaponry, and I'm like, oh, this is not me. This none of this is gonna sync with me. So I think I gave you a copy of the design.
Oh, I really appreciate it. I'll tell you, we're free. It's more than 10 pages.
Yeah. Well, what happened is if you read that first page, I literally say, yeah, hey, Clyde, I know that you said I wasn't supposed to change it, but I kept only 3 things. I kept the name. I kept Shadow, the picture of Shadow, which, by the way, wouldn't have made sense in a dwarf game. I don't know why Scott had a ninja created, but that was Ernie Chan, by the way, who created that image, the great comic book artist, and the fact that it was a fighting game. That's all I kept. And then I showed up. I guess he, Clyde in those days was so busy, he wasn't noticing that I was just around the clock writing, and constantly had these, diagrams and all kinds of stuff up on my screen as he walked by. I guess he just assumed that I was executing the thing, and then I plunked down what was like the first fourth of what you see there. I don't know, a couple hundred pages or something at least.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and so I plunked that down, and I said, well, and he was mad. Trust me, he was not happy. Yeah, because I mean, he was mad that I just disregarded what he said, which I would have a habit of doing often. I was pretty headstrong at that time, and so I was not always the best with authority, and Clyde, rightfully so, would have appreciated if I had not just gone forward with it and I had brought him along maybe 20 pages in or 30 pages in. The fact that I just plunked this huge thing down and had sort of just made it so that he kind of had no choice. He was going to have to come along from a production standpoint. But he got over it, because as he saw what I was doing, he started to get real excited about it. And certainly he really liked the developer. So he had a lot of trust in them, because, we were so closely bonded with each other. He kind of knew that, there was kind of lightning in a bottle there.
I can tell the listeners for free, Michael, the document is absolutely incredible. It's, I'm really proud you sent it to me, actually. It really, you can't imagine what the game would be now if you didn't build that and you kind of stuck to the original 10 pages. Did you have another name for the game at all? Was it always? I know you couldn't really change the name, but let's imagine you had that power. Was there ever a sort of name in the background?
Oh, no? I loved Eternal Champions. I mean,
it works.
The second I created the symbol, the Bushido symbol, and the eternity sort of idea, and I realized, right away it was going to be, this time I was going to learn all the lessons I learned doing the fighting game, Tongue of the Fat Man. I was going to, create a long-term vision. And I really think the other thing that surprised Clyde and kind of everybody was they were like, what is all this story? What is this? Because they're like, you don't put a, quarter in the Street Fighter machine and then you read 20 pages. I don't understand what all this story is sitting in there. And I'm like, fighting games should have as much potential to have a universe, that is well developed and then can be explored across multiple games. So that was a big deal that I kind of stuck to my guns, because there was, some kind of early pushback to let's strip this story stuff out.
That's one reason why I think it stands out, and it's even respected today, Michael, because it's not an arcade game. It's made purely for a console. It was made for the Mega Drive or the Genesis. I don't think it had an arcade machine, did it? Nope. And it was literally made for that audience. It wasn't, let's make Mortal Kombat now, let's port it over. That's why I think it stands out.
Yeah, and the other thing is I was not chasing after Mortal or Street Fighter, which I think is the great, if one thing kind of, I don't get tweaked by it anymore, but I used to really get tweaked by people saying, oh, well, I'll always hear reviewers or YouTube, I'll watch a YouTube thing and they'll say, well, it was obvious that Sega had to chase after and they created this knockoff. From my perspective, I was avenging Tongue of the Fat Man, avenging that cover, avenging that name. But standing on all that stuff that I saw early in a Street Fighter 1 arcade universe, I didn't feel I was doing my own thing. I really was.
And you respect both other games, I'm sure. You like?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I when I had any free time, I was bolted to this Street Fighter machine. You couldn't get me away from it. I adored. And then of course Mortal, I didn't like the Mortal play mechanic. I always liked the Street Fighter play mechanic, and I always liked the Mortal visual aesthetic and the violence.
Well, Eternal Champions does have it's quite dark and quite a moody game actually. It's not it's kind of similar in Mortal Kombat in that sense. I think it's quite adult in a way. Um, I mean, the whole characters, the whole story is you want to come back to life. Is that right? You need to sort of avenge your
Yes.
a second chance of life. I mean, do you have any favorite characters or moves, or how do you sort of reflect back on the game as a whole?
Yeah. So, you know, it was purposely moody, and you said a key word there, adult.
Mm.
I we were starting to see, right away that there was an opportunity with the Genesis to not just be about kids, that we could capture definitely, people at the college age and maybe even adults. And I really saw that in the fighting game genre. So I purposely worked with, and again, back to the design, if you read in the design, I pretty much, it's a pretty dark design when you read it. I mean, I'm describing all the kills, all the stuff. I'm driving this thing to be adult like. Yeah, as far as the favorite characters, I think people will be shocked because Shadow by far is the popular character.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but for me personally, it's Larson
Oh okay. Yeah, yeah.
and Jeddah. And so I'll tell you why on both. Larson is because I'm from Chicago, and he was kind of built with that whole aesthetic. And also, one of the important things about Eternal Champions is they're all based on real fighting techniques, real fighting art forms. And his was Praying Mantis, which I always loved that fighting form.
Yeah.
And Jeddah was Panak Salat, and so I love that fighting form, and both of them. I mentioned I like Chun-Li.
Yes.
I like aerial characters, and so any characters that can attack from the air as well as from the ground, I'm going to gravitate towards. But yeah, no, I can promise you, I can seriously take you on with either of those characters and make life real hard for you.
I mean, I used to love the game, and it was, I'm a big fan of that genre back in the day. And Eternal Champions really was a classy game. Mike, I'm not trying to give you a big ego, but it was just so fun, and just learning the backstories. And forgive me, it's not a fatality move, is it? But each character, or is it the location? You can actually
there's a variety of kill systems, but
yeah,
the big one that people love, which is called an overkill.
That's it. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, actually, my favorite overkill by far is in the CD version of, and it's when it's on Jeddah's stage, and it's when if you find just the perfect place and you kill, you see inside the circus tent this cannon fire this object out, and then you see a shadow over the character that's about to get killed, and it the shadow sort of moves as though something is descending on it, and then a giant clown car full of clowns lands on the character. And the best part is the clown at the end honks the horn and it gushes out blood. It is the most insanely ridiculous thing. Almost everybody cites they love the midnight one, which is the one where just you fall into a pit and it keeps cutting you up.
Oh, I remember learning that one, of course.
Yeah, that's often cited. That's the one people will always talk about if they reach out to me, and they'll always say, "Oh man, I love that one."
Again, this might be it's a bit of a rude question, possibly, Michael, but did you get that idea from Mortal Kombat for the sort of the overkills from fatalities, or is it an idea you just originally thought of beforehand, or?
No, it was no. I mean, it was in a sense. I mean, I wanted to do if I had sort of these ending moves in Tongue of the Fat Man that were based on certain things, that how the fight ended. They were very kind of primitive thoughts of this, but it had, of course, certain things had established themselves as what people expected a fighting game to work. So, I sort of went along with certain conventions at that time because I saw no reason to create a complete different version and then make people angry because I just tried to be different for being different's sake.
I get that. And Challenge from the Dark Side was obviously the kind of special edition. Is that right? The kind of mega CD version.
Yeah. It came because of the unfortunate timing of how things were shifting at Sega at this time, because the 32X is about to come, but also the Saturn is about to come. The life cycle's running out on the Sega CD. So I wanted to do, it just didn't work out timeline-wise. What we wanted to do was to do the full second version, which is the Eternal Champions versus the Infernals, which are the people who were actually led to their deaths. And you would fight against those two sides.
Wow.
And so that was the original plan, but there was just not enough time. So what we did was we said, okay, let's give like a serious enhancement here. Let's show what the Sega CD can do, like Cinekills and a lot more animation, and let's just improve the game in all the different aspects, and give people what they want. And we'll just have to kind of make it all happen in the third version, which was already pretty much on the books, so much so it ended up on the I think the Saturn packaging.
Amazing. I mean, quickly on Challenge from the Dark Side, I mean, so I've got here Senator. Was that really based on, is it Joe Lieberman, the politician?
Yes, absolutely.
That's incredible.
Yeah. He was not a happy man about it too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did find out eventually. He almost became vice president, which actually I could have tolerated, that having a guy who really dislikes me have that much power, because it would have meant George Bush didn't get in. But I thought, oh boy, if he ever became president, I'm in trouble. Because he really had it out for video games, as you know.
Of course,
He was the guy who, you can, if you read Blake Harris's book, it's very well covered in there. And I remember, Howard Lincoln just laying it on about how Nintendo was so kid-friendly and how horrible Sega was, and Mortal Kombat. And so that was my reaction, was, I put the Senator character, and he had all these moves like, red tape, and he could ban you, and he could veto you. And, my favorite one is when he makes the character fly upside down and shakes all the money out of your pockets.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, he especially disliked that one, I heard. And certainly the kills, having the nuke, and then having them turn into a post office person with Uzis was a thing to going postal, which was a game that was called out by them.
Yeah.
So I really laid it on, and that's why, actually, if you take a look when you boot up that version, it actually is on Deep Water, not on Sega. It has a Sega logo, as everything that boots does. But it's called Deep Water, and we invented that label for adult games. This was ahead of the ERSB. So we had the warnings on it, So that was the one and only time that Deep Water got used.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's where you see the shark. You see the character floating, and then the whole bloody. It kind of speaks for itself, just the opening.
Yeah.
So I always joke that I'm CEO to this day of Deepwater, subsidiary of Sega.
Was there any other games that were touted for that particular label? Was that a little
No,
bit? Yeah.
no, because then the whole ERSB stuff happened, and it kind of became a moot that you
Amazing.
just put mature on it and you were done.
So you mentioned the Saturn then, and you did say very briefly, Michael, that there was a sequel. There was a proper sequel in the works for Eternal Champions. But it didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? And how far was the game in development?
Okay, so I had written, I think, about 30 to 40 pages of the initial concept. The team in LA was already working on getting the development gear up. And that's when I get told by Joe Miller that he'd like to see me in his other office, which was the smoking balcony. That was at Sega that he had. Joe smoked, and so if you ever wanted to have a serious discussion with Joe, he'd go out there and have a cigarette, and then you would talk. And it was a good place because you could have some solitude and say some things without, because sometimes the offices you could overhear things.
Right. Yeah.
And Joe informed me that the project was, going to have to be killed.
Oh.
And I said to him, why? And he, said, well, from Sega of Japan's point of view, Eternal Champions is getting in the way of Virtua Figther being successful in Europe and the United States. At this point, Japan is very much asserting themselves, starting to push to, want to take control back, of what Sega of America is doing, and this is really when they do that. This is one of the first volleys. It should also be noted that my relationship with them was uniquely difficult because even though I'm head of the Omega Group, I'm designing product at this time, I'm also running test and QA, and you have to understand at test, we had a massive test department that ran at one point 3 shifts around the clock, 24 hours a day. And we, obviously we had a much smaller QA department that would then feed the builds out, but that was an important part, and I'm running that. One of the things, and then I'm closely aligned with operations. The person who runs operations becomes a very good friend of mine. Her and I literally work hip to hip because we figure out that if we work really well together, we can give the development teams a lot of extra time, because when you have to make cartridges and they have to come over on a ship, or in rare cases be drop shipped by plane, it's really important to know when a product is going to be able to end. And if you have serious bugs, you can't ship that product, so you need extra time. So we would find the time in between, sort of push the operation side to give an extra couple weeks of wiggle room so we could fix those bugs. And this really did not go over well with Sega of Japan, as you can imagine, because I was constantly interfering with their operational stuff there. And then I also had to say no. I imagine Sonic 2. Well, in fact, they called me Mr. No. That was a nickname because, of course, like on Sonic 2, I'd be constantly in Kalinsky's office, and I'd say to him, we can't ship this. And he goes, but we have to ship this. And I go, here's the bug, here's the problem, here's how many people are going to see it, here's what is going to be. And then, he'd call and they go, let me guess, Mr. No's not letting it through. And then, I'm sure I can't remember the amount of times they tried to get me fired.
Wow.
Because they viewed that I was being too perfectionist, and
Mm.
these were bugs, like we had bugs if there was a battery in the product and it would keep like score data or, game data. If that got corrupted, the whole cart wouldn't work. And so that cart then would have to be replaced. And the consumer would be, of course, very angry,
Mm.
having this occur. So these were serious decisions with serious impact. It isn't like now, most of your younger listeners, they have grown up with online,
Updates and
updates,
yeah, bug
being so
fixes. Yeah.
seamless, easy. In those days, it was all baked in, and so you just had to absolutely get it right. And we had the most elite test team on the planet, so at the time. And so and then besides operations, and then I'm also working part-time I had 4 offices at this point in Sega, because of the different buildings. So what building I was in, I had a little office, and I'm also over in Sega Toys, which is poking Japan also on some of the stuff there. So I think between the Virtua Fighter not being as successful and the fact that they could kind of stick it to me a little, I think that was kind of what happened.
Well, appreciate the honesty, Mike. It's quite a sad story, really, because Eternal Champions was successful, wasn't it? It did sell well. It wasn't it lost money. Yeah.
No, it was. I remember when Joe walked in and said, we had crossed the million mark, and I think, and then we went across 2 million. We were and by the way, they spent very little on the marketing of it. They did a pack-in for it, which helped sell even more. I got 4 staff to make it support the activator. Oh boy, that was fun.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that's a whole different story.
That's another story.
Yeah, that's another story. But yeah, no, I mean, and the European side loved the product. So I had a great relationship with Sega of Europe, and they were doing licensing with it, and we had comic book interest. There was choose your own adventure stuff. We had a little handheld LCD game. Here in the United States, 7-Elevens did a Slurpee promotion. We had Slurpee cups. I mean, it was devastating. I mean, and especially devastating for the Sega of LA guys, because this was going to then hit them hard and eventually really lead to the closing of that office.
I mean, Michael, I know we can't look into the future and parallel universes, but imagine if Eternal Champions was given the sort of love and care that, I don't know, Street Fighter brand or Mortal Kombat was given, throughout its life. We could have Eternal Champion games even today. Do you not think? Or is that a load of rubbish?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely think, there was 2 unfortunate spin-offs, each with their own sad story. Like, I was not involved with Chicago Syndicate. That was given to a different group, and they executed that for the Game Gear. And I lay no claim to that one, but I was in the part of the unfortunate experts thing, and I think we have a lot to talk on, so I won't get into the experts part. But
yeah.
But there was reasons to why those 2 spinoffs. So there certainly would have been spinoffs. I mean, I would have definitely concluded the main idea in the 3rd one, because the concept was very simply I was going to use the power of the next generation system to create this concept of, it's about time travel. And so you had the Eternals and the Infernals, and you had the Dark Champion and the Eternal Champion. And the concept is that there's a balance between these 2 things, and all of a sudden this balance starts to fall apart, and it turns out the bad guy is Chaos. And Chaos is trying to disrupt the order between the balance here. And the concept of the gameplay was is that you would play through the paths of the characters to try and reclaim their lives. But as you would lose a battle, it would cause time ripples, and the backgrounds would subtly change, and your move sets would subtly change, and your character design would subtly change. And these time ripples got larger and larger. So you would have these cool adaptive backgrounds. Characters would be adaptive. The move systems constantly in time flux. And so I really wanted to show the power of, using some 3D, not so much for the characters, but for the backgrounds, and just create this concept of, what it would mean if you lost a battle. Maybe technology goes away, and now your what was Rax's complete modern thing looks, like Mad Max now instead.
I love that idea. I mean, I love time. I mean, I'm sure you're a Back to the Future fan. I guess.
Massive.
Yeah. Me too. I think I love that. That would have been awesome.
Yeah. So that's how I kind of wanted to end it out. And then I always viewed there would be an ongoing thing that would come out of it, and there would be a reinvention of a path to create new characters, new sets of characters, and then bring some of the and then mix in the old ones, similar to kind of what both Street Fighter and Mortal have done, where characters have come in and have come out.
Oh dear. It's a shame, Michael.
It was a bummer. It took me quite a while to get over it. It still stings.
I bet it does. I've got a few quick fire questions regarding a few sort of characters on Eternal Champions. Then we can sort of move on to a new topic. But really quickly, who was in your eyes the strongest character in Eternal Champions, whether it's the Dark Side or the original game? Was there a particular character who had the best sort of stats overall? Depends on your fighting style, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say it definitely would be on the thing. I would argue that, having seen people play, probably Shadow is the strongest. When you master her, I would say that probably Shadow is the strongest.
No, yeah, fair enough. Good stuff. If you could, let's imagine you could like turn a movie or one of the characters into its own sort of standalone movie. Who would you like to explore sort of background even further with?
Well, everybody would want Shadow.
Yeah,
but for me, I would probably choose Larson, only because I love the 1920s. I love the idea of the mob being involved. I like the idea of a guy, a badass guy in a fedora using praying mantis technique. But yeah, that would be it. But that's sort of from a selfish standpoint. If I was advising somebody who was, I'd say, I'm sorry, that would be what I'd like to do, but you should do the Shadow movie.
Oh, I think that'd both be good. This is a bit of a weird question, but if you could meet one of the characters from Eternal Champions in real life, who do you reckon you'd most get along with? Have a drink with?
Yeah, Larson for sure.
Yeah. No, good shout. Michael, last time we had a text interview a few years ago, and you said there was a chance that we might see a new Eternal Champions game. Can you update us on that project? Is it moving forward, or is it paused slightly, or what's the latest?
Yeah, it's paused. Adam and I looked at it a lot. And I can't speak too much about, like, in a sense, who owns Eternal Champions and what the status of that is, in a sense. There's a lot of confusion over that. But we decided that we, could even, assume that we couldn't use it. We were exploring ideas of building just a fighting game that would have all the hallmarks. We looked at each of those. We spoke to a lot of people. At that time, I would say that it kind of was a lower point for fighting games. From a investment standpoint, I'm talking.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think at the time, Street Fighter kind of, the one player wasn't there, and there was a lot of unhappiness about that. I think I'm trying to remember which Mortal had come out, but I mean, neither were like setting sales records compared to other stuff.
Yeah.
And I think from the market, they're like, well, what can you do? It's just going to be another one of these. Where's the massive upside? And we were trying to argue that we would create a fighting system architecture underneath, like an entire back, a hub that would host the tournaments, that would almost like you would apply an SDK to, so that other fighting games could be developed on this whole backbone system. And they saw, that would take, investment and time. And I think they just weren't ready for it. So we're just sort of waiting for the right opportunity. I mean, Adam and I constantly talk about it, and he's constantly out there looking for opportunities.
So hopefully, well, it's not definitely. Well, it could happen, Michael. Let's say it can still dream.
It definitely could happen because at this point, I think it's quite clear that, and we can talk a little later about the current current status of Sega, but I think it's quite clear that they're not really up to wanting to do new games based on the retro games much, with the exception of Sonic. And even if they did, Sega of Japan / Sammy, my guess would be, even to this day, Eternal Champions is not going to get the nod from Sega of Japan to do a next one through them.
Streets of Rage 4, that was obviously, Streets of Rage 4, that was developed with Sega's help, but through kind of indie developers.
Yes.
Could that be an option, or is that,
I could definitely see that as a potential option. Because then it wouldn't be viewed as competing against, Virtua Fighther, assuming they're going to do something with Virtua Fighther.
We'll talk about Virtua, soon.
Yeah. But so that's it. I mean, that is a possibility that we have explored, and we think that we can make it work. But right now, they're sort of, I think, so Sonic focused. It's very hard to get their attention on anything else. And I think, I think Sega's trying to figure out where they're going to go from here. I have no insight into the current management team, but it just feels to me that, okay, they've done everything that they can do now on the retro side with the very good release. They sort of won the war of the little mini versions of the consoles.
Yes.
Yeah, they're sort of knocking out other mini versions. The Game Gear ones kind of are like crazy priced. It feels like they're running out of fuel on that side. So the question becomes is, do they start really going into the IP and using it, or are they going to continue to just focus on originals, and what do those originals look like? Because, we can talk about them later.
About 100%.
My point of view on them.
Well, as you know, Michael, I own a 32X, which is a really interesting peripheral for the Mega Drive or Genesis, whatever you're going to call it. It's quite a fascinating machine. Actually, I've spoken to Al Nielsen before. I know Dylan's spoken to Tom Kalinske. The 32X is a very controversial console. It gets a lot of derision even today. Some people love it, some people hate it.
Yeah.
And again, I loved, and I know that you've worked on the 32X. You worked on a number of games, and some weren't released, and you're the perfect man to ask. What was your role on the 32X, and what's your views on it? Was it ever given its full sort of power?
Yeah, no. The simple answer is no. The 32X, it's very hard to explain. I think for people who are interested, the Blake Harris book does a great job of explaining kind of how the 32X comes in, where Joe Miller's involved and where he's not involved, because it's a very long story. But it was definitely meant. They had done virtual racing cart with a special chip in it that
Yeah.
allowed it to do much better graphics. And I think they thought, well, we can't keep putting this chip in the carts. That's too expensive. And that sort of gave birth to the 32X, even though the Saturn was barreling down. And so, yeah, how I got involved with the 32X is, so as I mentioned to you, I have all these roles, and obviously my running test and at this point, I think, yeah, my partner in crime had left, and so I'm literally sitting over in ops, going to ops meetings, becoming part of the ops organization. And because of this, there's a great sensitivity from the other groups that I not give Omega, because now we're just monster sized, internally, a leg up. So we sort of say, okay, fine, we'll take on the Picos, we'll take on the ending life for the Game Gear, we'll do the things that the other groups, we don't get to do any of the Saturn launch titles. We'll do the 32X. So my guys were always grouchy about it, but it was the only way to sort of keep everything fair, and not put handcuffs on me that I felt like I couldn't make the sort of calls I had to make in test and in operations.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up with my group, essentially doing all the 32X stuff. So we did the Star Wars port.
It's a good game there. That's a good game.
Yep, yeah. And that was Sega of LA. Fantastic guys, and they executed that great, and that really showed what the 32X could be. I mean, there was potential there, but you can't have, I'll never be able to prove it to anybody except for just a couple of games, and and you're either going to believe it or you're not going to believe it. And I understand, because then you look at it over at the Saturn and you go, why would I ever buy one of these? Well, had it been done sooner, had it had more legs, just like the Sega CD, had it had more time to mature, there would have been a much more appreciation, and we would have been able to push the hardware. I mean, one of the things about end of life games is sometimes you get some really amazing games, because people have figured out how to get down to the metal of the machine and really exploit things directly, and you get these amazing effects or amazing speed. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'd love to. What game that was released do you really think showed the 32X its true potential? Do you reckon there's no game that was officially released that did that?
There was no. I think Star Wars came, even though, just because I think it's, the gameplay is so solid.
Yeah.
And you would have never been able to do that even with the little built-in chip that they used for the racing game. I think if you looked at that and thought even forward and thought, wow, if they had one more cycle of games, if Sega LA had been able to take everything they learned and then made an original game, that would have been an amazing game, because they had to learn it first. We didn't get it. I mean, we didn't get any dev kits. I mean, we literally got units.
That's staggering. I'm sorry, isn't it? Yeah. Really, let's be honest. That shows. I mean, it's not like you're part of Sega. It's not like you're like a third party developer.
I'll have a story for you later about that one. It's not the first time. I'll tell you a Sega CD story real quick at the end here.
Yeah, 100%. But you did work on, I think, 2 games that were never released on the 32X. Is that right?
Well, yeah, 3.
Oh, 3. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. The first 2 was one was called Bane.
Yeah.
And Bane was stood for bioadaptive nanite enhancement, but we just called it Bane. And it was a really cool game. It was the idea that you got these nanites that are clad onto a sphere, a spherical tank, and you are fighting, and these nanites, when you push the button, whatever you're on, fire, grass, dirt, water, whatever element, steel, that then the nanites form that substance around the sphere.
Wow.
And so you are then battling other spheres and other tanks that some have the technology, some don't, and you are you're on this 3D environment. Think kind of Marble Madness, but a much more cooler, faster, slicker version of how Marble Madness, the marble, used to move around.
Yeah.
And so you have these tanks, and you're just constantly altering your state. And as you take damage, you get smaller and smaller, your tank, until it explodes. And so you can grow back your nanite armor by doing certain things and get larger and larger. And so it was a very simple game, but the idea was it was going to be a first-gen game, was just to get this very fluid, sexy, fun, highly addictive game. So that was that one, and that really bummed me out. I was going to get to build that with Robert Morgan, who was one of the original Power Drift guys. Today, I'm still good friends with him to today, and that was devastating. These all got shut down, of course, because the 32X stuff got shut down.
Of course, yeah.
And then we had another one was called a town called town called Chaos, New Mexico, and the idea was, oh God, it slipped my mind. It was the classic game of where you managed a city, and it's not coming to me. You did just city management, and
yeah, SimCity sort of game, is that right?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't like SimCity. It was, I think, I forget the name, but it was the idea that, I build my little city, and then occasional tornadoes came, and I just, and it always frustrated me that you could only play the side of building the city, and you didn't get to be the tornado, if that makes sense. And so the idea of this was, you have this town, and you can be a positive force or a negative force. And the town is a very unlucky town, and so just the smallest little things can just turn into just disasters if you don't control them. And you can choose to be the guy causing the disasters or the one trying to stop them. And the idea would be like, you would flick a little flame onto the lawn would catch on fire, it would hit a gas pipe, then you'd see the gas building in the back explode, then a giant fireball would land and hit the energy plant, and on it went, and you had to just sort of shut down the chaos or increase the chaos.
That does sound, both those games sound quite interesting, if I'm being really quite ambitious in a way.
Yeah, and that's
unique.
And they were ambitious because we wanted to show that you could modify. We were going to, use a mix of sort of 3D texture swaps and all this stuff to really show off the power of what could be done.
Yeah.
With the 32X. And then the last one is the heartbreaker for me, which is Ratchet and Bolt. I sent you the concept on that.
You did. It looks amazing.
Yeah, and that one was that was my baby after EC. I was working on that constantly. I wanted to originally do it for Genesis, and I realized there wasn't going to be enough horsepower. I thought, okay, I'll wait for whatever comes next. And by the way, for the listeners, this is way before Ratchet and Clank existed.
I was going to say it's not like a Ratchet and Clank. How would you describe the game to the listeners then?
Okay, so the idea of the game is it's the future. The idea is that the police department and everything has been privatized. And the world is this fantastic place where people are really bored because it looks like Sony designed the world. Everything is all slick and beautiful and modern. And so people just start building giant robots. And like one of the ones is this, this woman who's going around and ripping the tops off of Neiman Marcus's and just looting them in this giant robot that looks like her with this, in her moo with like curlers in her head and stuff like that. And these robots would be these giant bosses that you would actually enter into, and you actually go inside the robots and fight them within. And the idea of Ratchet and Bolt is that the police ordered this huge fleet of robots. Robots to help fight against these mega robots. And the guy they ordered from rips them off and only gives them 2 robots, and that's Ratchet and Bolt. And they're really cheaply made. But the good news is he's willing to sell enhancements for them. And so the whole idea of the game is they have these massive weapon abilities. And I think they have 90 weapons in total. And the idea, I love them because the robots at first look human, and then when they get banged, they look like robots, and then when they get banged again, their legs fly off, and they have little spheres that shoot out that they're motoring on, and then eventually they get down to a little microchip that runs around. And so that's sort of your life meter, is what state of damage you're in. And it was very comic because you're being constantly exploited. The giant robots are completely ridiculous. The technology was cool because it allowed split screens play. So you could actually be in 2 different locations as the robots. It was side scrolling. And then the idea is the mega bosses was we were going to use the insides were all going to have 3D gears and 3D machines in there. And you would have to fight your way up these robots that are, even larger than the buildings that they're terrorizing.
Michael, I don't know, these 3 games, I mean, they sound like they could have been, they could have really been game changers. They could have really shown what the console could have done. Was there no chance they could have said, well, look, Michael, you've worked on these 3 games. We're not going to put on the 32X. Can't we put them for the Saturn? Was that never a discussion, or was it just, nope, moving on?
It was pretty much moving on because what had happened is that, we were not, in a sense, they wanted us to start focusing on other stuff at that point.
Right, yeah.
We were going to be, having to sweep behind, help with the third-party Saturn titles, kind of land the ending of the 32X. Also, at this point, you have to understand, from the time that Clyde, who then Joe Miller takes over for, I'm not supposed to be doing games. As an executive producer, you're supposed to be managing your group. And Clyde was very much, he would always say to me, I can have 1 of you, or you could make me 10 of you if you would manage your group. And that's what you got to do. And so Clyde was always trying to push me out of games. But he left, and then Joe Miller was kind of like, go, go, go. He loved that. I would like to get into anything because Joe was sort of, we had that in common. But then I think Joe realized, oh my God, you have 4 offices, and you're integral. I mean, you're very integral at this point to a lot of key things, like, stuff shipping on time and being bug free. And I think it was then that Joe kind of put his foot down and said, I need you to really manage now. I need you to focus all your guys, because we're starting to see the financial, Sega's seeing significant financial pressure. The company's starting to get into trouble. There's a real panic occurring. Tom Kalinski's going to leave. That means Sega of Japan is going to have direct control. And I think Joe's worried that, maybe he can't protect me in the way that Tom probably had to protect me quite a few times.
Gotcha.
So anyway, that's why. So I ran out of runway, and I never got do. I never got to come back to those games, and I didn't feel right going to one of my producers and saying, well, this is my passion, plop here, now make it yours. That didn't seem fair. Those guys had worked so hard and had taken a lot of tough projects, as I explained, because of me running these other things. So it was their time to do their personal passion projects.
Really quickly before we go on to a couple more topics, those three games you mentioned, the 32X, is the coding long gone? Is there any chance you could release them today on any other cartridge, or even like a sort of homebrew 32X, or is that out of the question?
It's probably out of the question. I mean, I've thought many times about, how to make Ratchet and Bolt into something, because it's still relevant today. I mean, it's hilariously, future predicting as far as some of the stuff that's going on in the real world. There's a potential that if I went to work at the right sort of company and they wanted to do for a given platform something really unusual, the problem is I fear that it would turn into some horrible freemium game where people would get shook down for weapons.
Yeah.
And then it would lose all its charm. I mean, it had to be made in an era where when you bought a game, you bought the game.
No transactions and stuff. Yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, because the whole idea was earning those progressions. That was what was going to make the game so replayable.
Yeah, if it was made today, there might be pressure on you to do microtransactions, and you're right, that's not, well, you don't want to do that, do you?
Yeah, I mean, it would just break the whole concept of what would have made that game fun and unique.
And again, I have to say to the listeners, I know they can't see it obviously, but the pack you sent me was it's amazing. The artwork looks incredible, and the story and the concept, I'd love to see it one day, 100%.
Yeah, well, Ernie Chan, did, once again, the great comic book artist, sadly also not with us. He did the art for that, and then we actually had a little tiny playable. We actually did get to do a demo. If you want, after the interview, I'll email you a link to the YouTube.
That'd be lovely. Yeah, 100%. It's a good question actually. Some people love the Mega CD. There are some people that love the 32X. It's a strange one. There's almost a battle between the two, which is better. I would argue maybe the Mega CD gets a bit more love overall. But where would you stand? Are you a fan of the Mega CD yourself, Michael? And which one's better in your humble opinion?
I would err towards the CD, only in that it allowed us more opportunity to try different things. You had the guys go off and do full motion video. You had people, it opened up a lot more creativity, and it solved the storage problem, which was always, just a massive problem for us. Yeah. I mean, Eternal Champions, the original cartridge, if I had not proven in the playables and got them to give me a decent cart size, which was the largest cart size at the time, it would have been a disaster. I mean, one of the reasons that, I couldn't make Green Dog a better game was, I had, the smallest cart size possible at the time.
Yeah.
And that's what was economically viable. So the CD opened all that stuff, and sort of, I think I'm not, from the user base, they got some benefits from it. They didn't get enough, in my opinion. But from the production standpoint, we loved it because it got us ready for next generation platforms.
Yeah.
It had us all thinking, okay, what could you do with nearly unlimited storage? What are you going to do with real music, and how are you going to license that, and what does that mean, and how are we going to have these, like with the Cinekills, we're going to make, use silicon graphic machines, or lesser devices to make full 3D renders, and then they look horrible using, that thing. But it got us understanding that there would be a future where those assets could be directly used, and so it was excellent in there, where the 32X, would have been, I think, maybe better for the user had it really had second generation games. I think there would have been some amazing games there.
Well, it sounds like it the way you describe it. Yeah, 100%. I've got on your list of games you worked on. One is Virtua Figther. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I worked on the 32X version.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Did that sting a little? Do you mind me asking? Did that sting a little bit, considering that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's before they killed.
Right.
That's before. So, and one of the other reasons I think that SOJ was mad at me was it turned out that team was like a little spin-off team that was doing the 32X, and they weren't kind of getting a lot of leadership from the Japanese side, except just make this thing. Because Japan at that point really didn't care about the 32X. So I sort of said, hey guys, how about we do more? How about we do this dynamic camera idea and playback and all this stuff? And so I tweaked it a bunch. I changed even some of I didn't change the moves, but I changed some of the dynamics behind it and stuff. And so when SEGA of Japan saw that I had tweaked their Virtua Figther, and they had no choice but to ship it. By the time they figured out what I had done, they had to ship it.
Well, they're not happy then.
Oh, they were not happy.
Oh, no. Really?
Yeah, not happy at all. Because they wanted just the original. The fact that it had these enhancements, the way that development in Japan works is it is, a very strict, concise way that you follow what, the marching orders are.
Yes.
If I had pulled off what I pulled off with EC and completely switcherooted on them, I would have been fired in a SEGA Japan universe.
I mean, we'll talk a bit more about SEGA Japan soon, but did you ever go to Japan? Did you ever get a chance to visit their offices? Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Did you get along with the people then working at the time, or was it?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I got along with the people, and for the most part, I got along. I mean, even management begrudgingly would like me and dislike me at varying times. I mean, again, where I got on their radar most of all is, I'm standing in the way of Sonic 2 shipping. Or I'm, STI had to go through tests, and they would gripe about, why can't they have their own test department and just not have to put up with us? So, I'd fall on and off their radar, from time to time, and other ways, like on a rare occasion, we had Disney come through, and we had to test a Disney title because it was so important to the platform.
Yeah.
So not only did I have SEGA Japan literally trying to get me fired, I had Disney to try and get fired twice. I always tell that to people. They always say, why are you always so down on Disney? I go, well, they tried to fire me twice and I didn't even work there.
Wow. Can I ask what two games were they? Or you don't have to tell me.
I can't say.
No. That's amazing.
I can't say because it could cause some potential. I'm sure all the people are long gone, but I wouldn't want to take the chance. They have long memories.
Do you watch Disney films anymore?
But I can tell you it was one of the top most respected Disney games on the SEGA platform.
I'm sure we can all guess.
Yeah, and it was really down to just they weren't used to going through a test process like ours. I mean, the third party program that they were used to was very relaxed comparatively, and put the onus on them to take care of their testing. So I understood, but I had to hold the line. It was really important to the success. I mean, one of the things I'm very proud of is, we didn't have too many, I think we had, I had to go to Alabama. Well, that was a rough one, to the SEGA CD facility where the CDs were being made. And I think that was the only time, and it was because the people making the CDs, it wasn't properly curing. Aside from that, we did not have any major QA or any major disasters on my watch, and again, these carts, once they were shipped, they couldn't be updated. So I was quite proud of that. And in a sense, if Disney would see it in the long view, I really helped them out because, imagine had this game shipped and then had this really obviously bad bug that, maybe 40% of the people would be running into. It may not be as beloved as it is.
And also like Sonic 2 as well, which I know, let's be honest, one of the best games on the Mega Drive. It's some people regard it as the best game on the Mega Drive. If that was released with lots of bugs, it probably wouldn't be so well respected today. Is that fair?
Absolutely, totally fair. And that was the problem was, again, just, Sega Japan viewed it as, well, we say it's done. And Kalinsky came from the toy, Mattel, and his background was toys, and so he really understood about like recalls and having to do things correctly, and what can damage a brand. So in a sense, and Joe Miller had this great attitude, so did Clyde. So in a sense, I always had their backing because they believed what I believed, is that people were spending very expensive, those carts were not cheap. They were spending good money, and people worked very hard, the development teams, to make a great game. And to just let something go just because you could, ship it a day earlier, was never going to work out well. So it was always a tough tension.
Man, that's incredible. I mean, you worked at Sega for 9 years. Is that right, Michael? You said about 9 years.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, between the various groups. Yes.
And how did obviously Sega grew massively over that time? I'm sure.
Yes.
How would you reflect back on that sort of time? And was there any sort of massive decisions that you saw maybe above your head that you thought this is amazing or this is going to end terribly? And how do you sort of just look back at the company even today?
Okay, well, that's an interesting one. So I would say first, I always say I bleed blue. I'm incredibly loyal to Sega. It is by far my favorite job I've ever had. It was, you don't get a better ride than when you walk into a company and it's just a small group of people, and then it explodes into this giant thing. Again, Blake Harris's book, I'm not plugging it. But I do think it did capture that we all liked each other and we all got along, and that part was incredible. I have more stories that, I'll do a little wrap. Would you like me to, kind of fill you in on like some of the stories?
If that's all right, Michael, yeah, I'll be on it.
Okay, well, so let's see. I would say, well, I'll say this, like, my favorite game I worked on was like EC, of course, Eternal Champions. And then my worst game that I already have mentioned experts, but the worst one is Young Indie.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, I cannot tell you. All I can tell you, because I'll keep it short because I have a lot of points that I want to just fill you in on, is that I had to go meet with George Lucas, and I had this great design about where it was the Philosopher's Stone, and it turned out that the Philosopher's Stone was involved with the Fabergé people, that the Fabergé were actually, all those eggs were advanced technology. And I had this fantastic Young Indie story to bring them all over. And I meet with George Lucas, and I'm not, I'll be honest, I was never a massive Star Wars fan for some reason, very oddly. I was more a Trek guy. But still, it's Star Wars. You're impressed. I'm at Skywalker. impressive. I like, obviously the indie movies,
Yeah.
and it was a devastating meeting.
Oh, was it?
Oh my gosh. I won't go into it too much, but I can tell you I cannot watch any George Lucas movie ever. So all those movies are lost to me. And it went from there into one of the most difficult games of my life. And then the developer I had was going through a divorce and financial breakdown. I mean, it was just disaster after disaster. In fact, we actually used that product to hire testers. If you can find a bug in that product, then we're not worthy of becoming a tester.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, and the testers, they some of them are still in psychological treatment for having to test that game.
I've never played it. I must give it a go to see how bad it really is.
Oh,
I might regret it.
it just it breaks my heart. And again, Lucas was not my hero. John Hughes was my hero, and I got to meet
what
him.
director?
Yeah, and I got to meet him for a whole day and pitch him the Home Alone. It was the only time I lost my cool. I have great celebrity cool.
Yeah.
I got to meet a lot of celebrities and spend time on a movie set or whatever. John Hughes, I just lost it. I'm like, Ferris Bueller and this and that, and he lets me go for like a half hour of questions before Tom Kalinske has to like calm me down and tell me to chill.
What's your favorite John Hughes film, if you don't mind asking? I'm a fan as well.
Ferris Bueller, yeah. But and Breakfast Club are just tied for me for different reasons.
Yeah, brilliant. And he sadly passed away, didn't he? Not too long.
Yes. No, yeah. I was crushed because John continued and stayed a hero. He had a toy store. I mean, the guy was just, he was the hero I met, and then Lucas was the complete opposite of that story, where it's just devastated.
Yeah.
Let's see. Other things that I can tell you about is, I think, I had some great managers. I already mentioned them. Joe Miller sadly passed, so that was really devastating. But I mentioned that I lucked into one of the best admins in the world, Joyce Barrios. And what's funny is she would go on and actually go on to start making games when Sega was in San Francisco.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, so she actually was she was amazing. I mean, you can imagine trying to keep track of me across 4 offices and all the things I'm doing, and she was unflappable. But she also learned from us and became really a really great game producer herself. So I was always proud of her for that, and she was an amazing person and so central to our entire team when you have a large team like we did. And at that point, I would always joke I was in my fat suit. At one point, I was quite heavy, and Joyce would always somehow miraculously get me a business class seat, or I'd be sitting up with Kalinske, and he'd go, "How do you do this? I don't understand. How are you up here?" So she was amazing. At that point, one of the great stories I remember is if you went to E3 or CES, Omega ran the booths because the other teams wanted to run around and see the products, rightfully so. So we didn't mind taking the hit, and we would dress up in suits and sunglasses. And this was before the, Will Smith movie.
Men in Black, yeah.
Men in Black. So it was we consider ourselves like a little mafia. So that's how we dressed. So I always love when I see the old pictures of the guys with their sunglasses and suits on. It looks like E3 brought to you by Reservoir Dogs.
That's amazing.
Let's see. We all had nicknames, which
Oh yeah.
I notice now in modern days. I don't know. The companies are so large, people don't have nicknames. So I sort of miss the idea of nicknames.
What was your nickname?
Mine was Odin. And because, in those times, everybody would say I was a pretty scary guy. They go like, oh, well, you're going to have to go ask Odin. So, and then my right-hand guy became Thor. But there was like Eel and Spider, even though Eel was really Loki, but by how his personality was.
Yeah.
Another quick story. We did Scud, the Disposable Assassin, was based on a comic book, and Dan Harmon was one of the two guys. So I'm sitting there with Dan Harmon in my office, thinking, well, hope this comic book thing works out for this guy. Because he's very much the guy he is now. I mean, he's sort of disheveled and just spouting great stuff, but kind of like this maniac genius. So I just thought, well, he was an odd man. And that kind of happens. You meet people along in 9 years that turn into these very famous people. So I told you about Sega CD. Another Japan reason that this was when I got on their nerves. This is before I think I'm not running. Am I running test? Maybe, yeah, I am running test at this point. But so what happens is they send 3 Sega CD units for us, but they send them so none of them are working. Because they don't, for whatever reason, they said, well, we're not ready for the interface, for pictures of the interface to be taken. We're not fully decided, even though I know that this thing's is already in production because I know from the ops side.
Wow.
And so what I do is I take the 3 units apart very carefully because they, after the photo thing, just in case they have to take more photos, and take the parts and build one working Sega CD unit. And Shinobu Toyota, who is the eyes and ears of Sega Japan, works as late as I do. So he comes by and he goes, wait, you have a working Sega CD? How? And I go, well, I sort of built it. And so of course, he then reports to Japan immediately. And that was probably one of the first times I truly annoyed them because, of course, then marketing took pictures of the, so that they could get that out and in production to what the interface looked like of the Sega CD interface.
That's I mean, they purposely sent you broken Sega CDs. Are you sure, Mike? That's not just bad travel. You didn't get.
No. Absolutely. They said we're not ready to show the actual working unit. And then I said, I can make, I realized, I looked and I go, oh, I can make this actually work. If I just part 2 of them, I can get one of them working. So
I mean, the Japan versus Sega America, that could literally be a movie, couldn't it? It just sounds unbelievable.
I think Seth Rogen holds the book, the Blake Harris book, and
yes,
there's a lot.
Yeah.
Is
that going to happen? Do you know? Or
no, I don't know anything about that, but I do know that there would be a lot of stuff about that.
You would be in the film. I mean, who would you want to play you? Any actors? Or
I'd be very minor in the film. I'm only in there for blast processing. And then Al Neal. I only appear twice in the book. The book is not about product development. That book, Ken Horowitz wrote a book about that. That really covers all of the internal, what was Omega, what was this, what was that. He wrote the definitive book on that. But yeah, I'd be there. Yeah, so if they actually didn't just make me on a speaker or something, I don't know who I'd want to play me, because you have to understand, at this point, I'm a pretty giant-sized guy.
Really?
I'm a big guy. I don't know. Hopefully I don't have a ponytail at that point like I did at one unfortunate point. But yeah, I guess, they wouldn't be playing the thin normal version that exists to me now. But so I don't know who they'd have to play. I guess they'd probably get like Jonah Hill. But the heavier Jonah Hill, not the Jonah Hill.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
They're amazing stories.
Yeah, the whole blast processing, I'll never live that down. But I do love how it's presented in the book because,
Yeah.
Joe Miller never forgave me for that one. But, because France Tatiata, the marketing person, came to me and just said, do we have anything that they can't do? And I said, burst mode. And she said, oh, burst is horrible sounding. I'll call it blast. And then she just went away, and next thing I knew, there was a commercial and Joe Miller in my office saying he'd like to speak to me on the balcony.
Oh dear. Oh man.
I have one other, two
Yeah.
things. Michael Jackson meeting. That was one
Wow.
of those
Yeah,
bizarre,
yeah, yeah.
pretty famous. Michael Jackson came. He was with Michael Milken, who had been in jail. And had been let out because he had prostate cancer. He survived it, went on to found the Milken Foundation. And funny enough, I would work with his son, Gregory Milken, later on. But I'm sitting there and at that point, Michael Milken, you could tell he was, battling cancer. But he was doing this initiative for children. And so that's why Michael Jackson was there. And so they said, present all your products. And so I was going to go last. And the idea was we would present our products and Michael would pick one. And they would win a signed Michael Jackson CD.
Oh, nice.
So we presented all the products, and I remember Joe saying, he said, show Eternal Champions, try and not do any of the violent stuff, but, show it. And I kind of had a bead on Michael Jackson because I'm watching the others sort of pitch to him what they're doing and stuff, and he seems very, oddly interested in anything connected to kids. Let's just say some weird foreshadowing there. And I pick up on this. So when I get to Eternal Champions, I start showing it, but I really focus on telling them how we did the character development and that we did testing on all the characters, and we used kids and teenagers. And I really, butter them up on, we got the kids, they gave us the vision for the characters, and then we brought them to life. And he goes, this one's my favorite.
And you got wow.
And everybody just turns to me and is so angry because they're like, what, the violent fighting game gets Michael Jackson to pitch, and then Joe's like, you're an executive producer, you shouldn't even be able to win this thing. So to this day, I still have it in my home. Shelf.
You have a signed SEGA, Michael Jackson CD, an album.
Yeah. It's not really worth anything now for obvious reasons.
You should have sold. Well, let's not get into that realm, but you should have sold it maybe 5 years ago.
Yes. But yeah. Anyway, there's that. And then the last thing is we've never talked about this outside of our group, but there was a guy. He was work with Joe, and he was in management, and he left, and we were kind of happy because for whatever reason he didn't like Omega. I think specifically I may have had a part of that because he was a guy that do it by the numbers, and he would work a lot with Sega of Japan, so he'd take a lot of heat from with me being me. So when he left, we took this giant cabinet, this black giant cabinet, and put it into one of the cubes. I won't say who, to protect them, but we then built a hidden bar in it. And so we actually had a fully working hidden bar, like you could order margaritas. And one of the reasons we did this was, besides, we had to be responsible. Obviously, we wouldn't allow anybody to drink and get in a car or drink and lose their thing. But there was opportunities like on a product launch, on a thing, on a like when we knew we were going to be working through the night, then everybody would, get their margarita order in or whatever. But it also meant that the executives would wander over to our building because we always had to go to them, but have some fine scotch and bourbons and they'll come to you. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we'd never get away with it nowadays. There'd be
No.
no way that you could hide a bar. But it was called the Monolith, and it was undiscovered the whole time.
Really? What was your drink of choice at the time, if I could ask?
Oh boy. Well, for a while I didn't drink, but I think it was weirdly we had some like scotches. Like I remember Talisker Scotch was really
Hmm.
special. I always wanted to go. I wanted to go to the Isle of Skye just because of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, but our the person I got to be careful and not slip up and say their
Yeah,
name.
they say a name.
They would be very sensitive to this, but they made the best margaritas in the business.
Ah.
But it'd be so funny because you'd hear blender going, and 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 people not in the know would go, I swear to God, I just heard a blender.
No, you're imagining it. Don't
Yeah,
worry about it.
totally, total imagination.
Oh, Mike, but there's some brilliant stories there. I mean, you could write a book, really, couldn't you? Let's be honest. No, I feel really privileged that you
Oh,
shared it
oh,
with us today. Thank you.
oh, my
I genuinely
pleasure.
mean that. It's been so interesting. We're getting close to the end of the interview, but we've had a really good chat today. But could I ask, why did you leave Sega in the end? And was that the end of your career in video games, or did you move on to somewhere else afterwards?
Yeah, no. So what happened so we transitioned to Sega Soft,
Mm,
which is Sega Soft is supposed to be uh, the idea is we're going to do third-party games.
mm,
I mean, not third-party. We're going to do ports of Sega games on other platforms. That's really what it was supposed to be at first. Sega Japan comes in and says, nope, not going to happen.
mm,
So we're like scrambling. So we start to make other types of software. I mean, I'm still running Omega. I'm running the kids group, and also within the kids group, we've developed a group focused on female titles, and so we do like virtual makeover with the Cosmopolitan, and it like sells 1 million units. So
oh,
we're like doing good. We're like hanging in there. And then, but it's the company isn't happy in a sense about like we're still kind of pushing to try and figure out how we can get our IP able to be on these multiple platforms. And so eventually what happens is they move us out onto an online gaming project because the big thing is Doom is the big thing.
oh
Quake
yeah.
is massive. Quake.
Mm,
Quake is changing everything, and there's just a couple of online gaming networks. So we create Heat.net, and it's funded from key Sega figure. It has some Sega money within it. We're using the building. So it's sort of Sega, sort of not Sega, and I create the whole launch for it. I'm now vice president of product development, and we get the launch titles. The thing I'm most proud of, I created a fighting game with Dominic Wood's team in the UK. Again, spending tons of time
mm.
in the UK. And he's in Kingston. And
Oh, Kingston. Yeah, yeah, Kingston. Yeah.
yeah, Kingston. Yeah, and I'm hanging out there, just loving the team. And we create the first NetFighter online fighting game.
Oh, wow.
Um, and it can even work on dial-up.
Oh, what?
Uh,
That's incredible.
Yeah, and so well, because I worked out with the head developer, Phil and we figure out well if we lose connection, we know what the character we kind of predictively decide until the modem can reconnect or the data stream can reconnect to where it's going. So the computer takes over control and then
Mm.
seamlessly hands control back to you. And the result was this amazingly playable fighting game. And to a degree, that technology would be used again and again
Mm.
by fighting games that came later that used online connections. So we were the first.
That's a good, feather to your bow, isn't it? A little bit. That's quite
Yeah.
impressive, actually.
Fighting games just constantly are part of my
Mm.
life
Yeah, yeah.
throughout this entire thing. And so what happens is I do not get along with they bring in a guy to be the adult in the room, as they say. He's from IBM, never doesn't understand games, doesn't understand, he's buying ridiculous giant super servers, Sun Micro Machine, Sun, mini servers. I forget the name of them, the level of servers, but like we're way overbuying. So we're butting heads constantly, and so at that point he said to me, because he gets out and it's doing good. But it's early, and that also happens a lot in my career. I always do stuff too early. And you want to be Apple's a great example of this, is even though they tried to get me fired twice too, but that's a different story. But didn't work for them either. But they always get the second mover advantage. First mover advantage is not always, and we were doing that first mover advantage. And so he's invited myself and some of the other key people, including the guy I reported to. Even though I reported to him, I really reported to the guy who led this project. In my mind, and that probably made him angry too. He essentially invited us to leave. And so that was the end of my time, and it was very tough. I mean, I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay there and make it work out. And I had ideas, which I'll tell you in a second where I end up with. But just very funny thing is, this guy really regretted though, because it turned out, and I didn't know this, but the other senior guys had negotiated that if we were let go, they had to do a year payout on us.
Wow.
And so suddenly I'm like, what? And then it gets even better. I'm sitting in his office doing, I forget what they call it in HR, but your exit interview. And
yes.
And his admin comes in, and she looks like, a relative died or something, and whispered in her ear, and he says, well, evidently he said you must have had some deal that's still in place, and it turned out I did. I had a deal with SEGA where I was always problematic to take vacation because I was so critical. So I took only one vacation in 9 years.
That's wow.
Yeah. And so my vacation time, my one part was, and this came, I think, around Sonic 2. I said, fine, I'll work through, but I get to keep my vacation. So that was written in. So 9 years of vacation adds up to about a year and 3 months worth of pay. So not only do they have to pay out the year on the contract, but they find out that I have a year and 3 months of pay coming.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, so this guy gets lit up by his boss, that how in the world could he have not known this? And why did he pull the trigger on this? Because now it's a complete disaster. They were already under financial difficulty. So that was one of the funniest stories, was finding out that I literally had all that vacation pay that I had completely forgotten about.
I'm not going to ask how much that was, Michael, but I assume it was. It probably made people in SEGA blush a little bit.
Well, I mean, it was. I mean, because it was through various pay scales in a sense. I mean, it got better towards the end in a sense, right? So it wasn't as much as you would think, but it certainly was. It certainly was a nice surprise to me, considering I was not going to have a job for a certain amount of time. But it was also, to be honest, I had so few people. I was so lucky. I got to work with all great people. I really have only twice in my life had what I would say is bad work experiences from the boss level. And so to see just like this little revenge twist, that I had to just do nothing and watch this guy just melt down in front of me. That how, he literally asked me, he said, would you consider not taking it? I'm
Wow.
like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you were pushed. It wasn't like,
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
you
exactly. I
can't
said,
feel.
I said, you're essentially firing us. So, yeah, no, I think I'll be taking it.
Mm, well, I don't think anyone can blame you personally.
Yeah.
But it's a sad in a way, though, isn't it? That's not how you wanted to leave Sega. I don't think
No,
it's.
no,
Yeah,
no. It was. I mean, the whole thing was sad because Sega was falling apart
yeah,
anyway. I mean,
of course.
it would eventually move to, the city, and it had some good people came with it from the original, but then there was a lot of new people, and they kind of lost their way there several times,
Yeah.
and then Sammy, of course, came in, and it's hard. I mean, many times I've said openly, to people, and I'm sure it's gone back to Sega. I said, I would go back tomorrow,
Mm.
and work there. You wouldn't even have to make me in charge of product development. I'd be open to maybe just doing games.
Yeah.
I even though I think I would end up probably, running product development when they weren't looking, just because,
Yeah.
and probably taking over 3 or 4 other jobs, also just because that's of my nature. So yeah, that would, I would love to do that, and I just don't see them embracing that for anybody. I mean, I don't understand why at Annunciata they never had a discussion with, even
Mm.
though I don't think Ed would want to manage, but why didn't they go to him and work with him more, or countless others?
Well, Sega's a really interesting company. There's so much good about it, but obviously things did go really badly for them.
Yeah,
But they're still
yeah.
around, to be fair. They are still around.
Yeah, no, and
Yeah.
I had hopes when I saw them ship the Mini
Mm.
that, okay, you really executed this better than the other guys did.
Yeah.
You kept control of it, which was the right thing to do. Now
100%.
now 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 do something. Now really set a vision, because they haven't had a clear vision in a long time.
No.
Like when
And
you think
yeah.
Sega, like, aside from Sonic, and that's great, Sonic should be what you think about Sega, but you got to have something else besides that, game-wise, that you think about them. EA is sports. What
Mhm.
is Sega beyond Sonic? EA is also on lots of online games.
Mm. No, that's
But
true. That's true.
I'm saying every company that is successful in the space, has is known for being good at a certain thing, not just one thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on, actually. I'd love to see Sega come back to where they belong. Whether that's a brand new console, that may be a bit stretching a bit too far, but I do think there's a chance they are slowly getting back to their not old ways, but like the Sonic movie, for example, that was a big success, wasn't it? They are finding their
Yeah,
feet again a little bit. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think what they need now is they need to give Sega of America absolute, give them some autonomy,
Mm.
and let them rebuild a real team there.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. Is I see, I don't know, I can't get in there. I by the way, I am not on top of any of the studios that are doing work for them.
Mm.
They are doing great work, or whatever on their own. Not talking about them. I'm talking about inside the company, internal development outside of maybe those studios, because those studios are making their independent product, their vision doesn't really, in some ways, some of it just doesn't jive to Sega, as a
Mm.
brand,
Mm.
and that's okay, but it's kind of confusing. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wish they'd say, we're going to go back and use our back library, and we're going to make all new modern versions of that, or else we're not going to do that. We're leaving that retro thing behind, but this is what we're going to be known
Mm.
for. We're going to be the arcade guys, and we're going to make all, we're going to revitalize, we're going to treat these next gen platforms like they're arcade machines, and we're going to execute new arcade game level executions.
They just need a plan, don't they? Like a proper plan, a real like 5-10 year plan.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like what happens is their studios are independent. The
Mm.
inside is just doing what Sega Japan is and Sammy is telling them to do, and they're very focused on constantly what we can do with Sonic.
Yeah. which is good to a degree, but it's not the be all and end all, is it?
Absolutely, but you need something else to help support Sonic so that you have time to make the games great. If you need an extra year to make that Sonic game perfect, they should get the extra year. But what do you do in between? Well, there should be other stuff.
Yeah.
And stuff that complements that audience that plays those games.
Well, I hope personally, like Streets of Rage 4 kind of could be the kind of the blueprint, as in they could revitalize some of the old IPs, like Golden Axe and so forth. Yeah, I'd love it.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know how they view that project internally. I don't know if they view that as a success or not. That would be the big question, that we'll see if it does become the blueprint. Anyway, I'll tell you where I landed. So after that, I oddly enough end up at Yahoo as the first outside hire on the management team that are all the original Stanford team.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And I'm the director of entertainment and media there. So I'm a lot more than just games there. So I run the entertainment group, which is music, movies, TV, chat events, games, of course. And what do we do in the games? Even though the games group did exist before I got there, but I continued to focus it on doing casual gaming. And that's exactly where I would have brought Heat, and that's where they tried to go, and we ended up decimating them over, and it wasn't my wish to decimate them, but we did through Yahoo Games. And then on the media side, I'm running travel, news, weather, sports, and the local verticals. And you may say, well, that's odd. How does the video game guy end up there? But they interviewed a bunch of people, and I pitched them that, one, I had done all these jobs. So I had all this experience that normal game people would, doing operations, doing these things, doing all this stuff, being technical and all these other things. And I pitched to them something that they didn't. Everybody else was sort of not future looking. And I said, look, all the interactivity that's in gaming is going to become part of the Yahoo experience. The interactivity is only going to increase in the internet. It's only gonna, and I said, I even pitched to them, things are going to get gamified even. Yeah. These simple things will get, gamification will come to everything. And this kind of blew them away, and that's how I ended up being that first outside hire and beating all these other guys who were these Stanford grads and Harvard grads that were pitching much more business focused stuff. So yeah.
Oh, good. I mean, Yahoo's huge. I think people forget how big it was.
Yeah, and I when I walked in, again, I'm the first outside hire from the core group. They're all Stanford guys that work with each other. I mean, that went to school with each other. And I'm employee 300. And and then I wake up and there's like 1,500 of us. And again, just writing up the thing. Yeah, people forget that Yahoo was Google before Google existed, and we did all kinds of stuff. There was the instant messenger and all the mail and I of course was everywhere. I had my fingers stuck in everything. And I had to, I worked on, of course, all the cutting edge stuff. So when they, unfortunately acquired broadcast.com, I got, had to work with Mark Cuban on that. And that was a difficult go, but like we brought over radio and TV and all of these things, and they were so future looking, and again just broke my heart when there was a shift in management there and they just went the other way.
Yeah.
And there was an opportunity, even they could have even bought Google. The guys came in and were looking, at that time they weren't going to necessarily do their own thing.
You've seen it all, Michael, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So anyway, I did, by the way, before I took the Yahoo job, I did have my own company. So I did do games one more time. I had a company called Boat Drinks. It's play on things mobsters say to each other. It's their version of heaven. In Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, the movie. And I did the sequel to Asteroids, and that did quite well for Activision, the current Activision, not my original Activision, but Bobby's Activision. And then I worked on X-Men, but unfortunately there was a developer changed, and then they changed the design. But they kept some elements of some stuff I did. So I was working on games and thought I'd be working on games when the Yahoo opportunity came along, and that sort of diverted me. And then I took a bunch of time to travel the world. And worked on some odd projects here or there. Like a friend of mine and I saw the future of how to send large attachments. You can't send them through mail. How do you do that? And we had a thing called heavy mail, which could have totally worked, and a competitor beat us first. Made a ton of money on that, and then my last thing that I did, probably most recent, is I worked for a company called they started out as Last Legion Games, and then they became Alt Ego, and they had a digital avatar system that they just didn't know what to do with, and so I came in and worked on. I ran about 16 employees there. We did Facebook games at first, so I did the Golden Nugget Facebook game, working with Golden Nugget, and then I decided that we could use Twitter. We could game over Twitter. No one had tried that yet. And we got this idea and we were going to work with Riot Games. They actually wanted to work with us with League of Legends, where you'd be able to battle over Twitter.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it was great. But it was a very expensive studio, and we just didn't have enough runway, and it was tough because we were trying, like when we did the Facebook stuff. By the time we got there, Facebook pulled the rug and you weren't making money. And the people we were working with, like we built this thing for this Diamond Resorts, which was a timeshare company. And they're like, okay, well, go get us people, go advertise for us and make this game successful. And we're like, no, this is your game. You're supposed to advertise it, and you're supposed to be successful. So stuff like that. So I finished there, and then I've just been doing personal projects and stuff since then, and I'm staying doing my best to stay COVID free and self-teaching.
Good on you.
What to do next.
Michael, I've really enjoyed this interview, and I want to say thank you properly. I mean, I know you listen to our podcast, and I feel like, and we're lucky to have you, because I know that you don't always do a lot of interviews.
By voice, no. I'll do written interviews, and even then, I'm notorious. You've read my game design, and I'm sure you are dealing with the grammar hit and the punctuation hit that you must have taken from reading that. So even on my written ones, I'm pretty slow, because I usually will beg one of my friends, my friend Julie, who I work with at Altigo, to edit me, so I sound like I know what I'm talking about. But it is rare that I do talk. So.
It means a lot, and I know our listeners are going to love this. And I just love hearing a proper, truthful insight into Sega. It's been so fascinating. Really do appreciate it. Thank you.
And I know you always end with your question about who you want.
Yeah. The final question, just to finish.
That's my favorite part, by the way. I love that.
We've had some great answers.
And I got to answer it once in the written one.
You did. So you can change your answer. You're welcome to change it at all.
I am going to change, but I still stand by Earthworm Jim as one of the best fully realized original characters. I think I think having seen it again on the Sega Mini, man, it stands up.
It does. Well, the question, if anyone's, people who listen to the podcast, I think they know what it is, but basically, if you could share a few drinks of any video game character, who would you choose and why? And you originally did say Earthworm Jim. It's a great choice. But have you got another answer?
Yes, I have another answer. I'm going to cheat a little here. I'm going to give you two answers, but there's really the one. My old school answer, just because I getting ready for this, I had to kind of just write some notes so I wouldn't lose my place. And I was thinking about like the arcades, like would I pick an old arcade character? And I thought, yeah, I would pick Star Castle, the actual ship, because the crew must have been pretty fun to hang out with. But
That's a good,
yeah, I adored Star Castle. That game blew my mind. The idea of vector graphics and the way that was designed and the shielding system and just everything about that, I just loved it.
Oh, that's a good answer. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'd like to, I just would like to believe what was going on in the ship there. Like there was a whole crew, and they had a good time when they weren't trying to, survive there.
100%.
But the new school answer would be Agent 47 from Hitman.
Oh yeah, of course.
So that has to match my kind of personality to why I'm so bonded to Larson, to why I like the kind of mobster hitman, and especially a modern, sleek take on a hitman. I just live for that. So I mean, even Shadow. I mean, when I decided Shadow as an assassin and as a hit person, I mean, you can just see it all through. I love that. And so Agent 47 for sure would be so interesting. Hopefully I wouldn't be taken out after drinks. That would be my only concern. I'd have to bring security.
Of
Not
course,
that it seems to matter. You'd probably kill them and me. But yeah, Agent 47 for sure.
Oh, Michael, that's both brilliant answers. Look, like I said, really appreciate your time today. It's been an excellent interview. I generally mean that. And thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you. And you guys keep it up. I mean, I love when, like, on a rare occasion, you'll give me a Twitter shout out to pull me into some mess of a conversation, which is funny. I love it when people do that, because I think they're always shocked that I respond. And And I think you guys were shocked that I listened. Of course I listened, because
I think Rob famously said, "Oh, Michael won't listen anyway. It doesn't matter." And it was like, actually, I did.
Yeah. I said actually. Yeah, I came right on and
it was brilliant.
Immediately said, "Yeah, I do listen." Yeah.
And there's no malice, there's no malice intended. We like hearing your opinion, and we don't.
No. I loved it, and I don't blame. I mean, there's so much to listen to. It's hard to get around to everything, but you guys, I've always had a soft spot, and I always do my best to make time, and if I not, I catch up. So if I somehow do get a mention and I don't respond right away, it means I'm just behind on my podcast. I do get around to them.
Oh, you're what a lovely thing to say. That's really made my day, actually. I genuinely mean that. We'll say goodbye then, Michael. It's been a real bumper episode. It's been really interesting, and you never know, we could do this again in the future, possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm certainly, if you want to drill down on something, I do get a lot of people who will back channel to me about the Ken at Sega 16, literally has a bat line to me that he picks up all the time and says, do you know who was involved with this? What is the backstory on this? Who should I really contact on this? Do you know the truth about this? Because I was being stretched across all these roles, there probably isn't anything that I didn't have a little finger in, even though, it may be in Enuncia's products, I would know exactly a lot about the product because, I would have known about it being in test. I would have played it myself, to help the testers. I would have heard Ed talking about when, he got the idea to create it. I know Ed, so, even though he notoriously talk about not doing interviews, he's the hardest one to land. He's doing more recently. So Ed, I would be glad to either come back, or if you guys need any help, just contact me and I'll tell you what I know about the story.
You legend. Okay, Michael, it's been such an honor. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's my great pleasure.